Yo, what's good, everybody? I hope you're happy and healthy. From the few years I've been working on building my knowledge of music, one thing I've noticed is there's always an argument over what the next big plugin is or why you need that new pack of plugins from that one company that costs $500. As far as I can remember, making music was always a cool challenge to see what you can do with what's in front of you, Making the most with what you have. That's why today I've compiled what I think are the top 5 stock plugins on Ableton that you can use right now that will completely take your tracks to a professional level and improve your understanding of not only what you're doing, but why. Also, before we get started, I just want to take a second to say thank you to all the new subscribers and just all the general love we've been receiving from you guys on this channel. We're almost at 100 subs and counting, and I can't tell you how stoked I am to be growing this community with you guys. And I want to know down in the comments. I want to know if you try any of these plugins or if you already have. Alright, let's get into the video. These are my top 5 stock Ableton plugins. Number 5 is Limiter. So a limiter is intended to come as the last effect on your mastering chain. They are designed for mastering, but you can use them in a lot of situations to boost gain or manipulate individual tracks as well. On your far right and left, you'll see both the input and output volumes. These are basically your signal before and after limiting. Gain boosts the signal before it goes through the limiting process. Once the gain is boosted, you'll see within the meter the amount of limiting the input is receiving. Look ahead, this is how long we give the limiter to anticipate whatever kind of peaks are coming. You can take it up or down to adjust for smoother limiting. Release, by default this is set to auto, meaning it responds to the incoming signal. If we turn it off, the release works independently and you can manipulate and release time, adding more or less response time to the compression of the limiter. Here we have the ceiling. This is where we set our limit to determine the ceiling for the output. Note that wherever you set this level to, the limiter will never exceed that setting. And lastly, we have the meter. This is the overall output volume of your signal. Side note that on a master track, your signal should ideally have around -8 decibels of headroom to allow for optimal limiting, or even more so just to give your mastering engineer more flexibility if you're sending it out. This is what's commonly known as a premaster. Limiting is absolutely essential in any mix, to be honest, and it's basically the L2 from Waves and works just as well in my opinion. Next, at number 4 is EQ8. EQ8 is Ableton's studio EQ. It's an 8-frequency equalizer, and honestly I don't know why you would even need any other EQ on your computer. Here's a cool tip I actually just found out about. If you click on the spectrum, you can blow it up way larger to see more of what you're doing. This can come in handy, particularly when you're mixing or dealing with more linear EQ situations. Just a cool tip that I found. So this EQ comes with 8 different types of filters. Only 4 are activated by default, but you can simply click on any of the remaining 4 to activate them. But make sure you only activate the ones you're actually using. Each filter has 8 different filter types. If you're unfamiliar, you have low cut, which hard cuts low frequencies, high pass, which only lets the high frequencies pass, low shelf, which boosts or alternates everything below the filter point, bell filter, which boosts or cuts specific bands of frequencies within and around the filter point, a notch filter, which completely cuts specific frequencies, high shelf, which hard cuts to high frequencies, kind of just the opposite of a low cut. And you have low pass and high cut, which act exactly like the low cut and high pass, but for the higher frequencies. Now on the far left, we see frequency, gain, and Q. These top 2, frequency and gain, can both be manipulated by manually dragging the frequencies across the spectrum or by moving the actual knobs for more precise mixing. Q is the width of the filter, which much like the top 2 can be used both in the spectrum and via the actual knob. Just hold down Option to manipulate it within the spectrum itself. Top far right, we can see the display enabler for the spectrum analyzer, and this basically just toggles the EQ animation you're seeing behind the filters. To the left of that, we have audition mode, which is kind of cool. If we toggle this button, we can actually hear the changes we're making in real time to the mix, so we can focus specifically on which frequency we're working on. You can see this EQ has 3 modes: stereo, left, right, and mono stereo. So basically stereo is activated by default and mixes the EQ in a stereo field. Left, right separates the 2 EQs into 2 different frequencies, one for left and one for the right side. Mono stereo is similar, but it has mid-side mode, so it basically has 2 EQs, one for mid and one for side. Adaptive Q basically locks the width of the filter as you move it around the spectrum. This is actually like really convenient. So as you adjust the frequency, you don't have to manually adjust the width of the filter later. Scale takes all of your scale points and scales them down, and this helps a lot with automating. Gain is the overall output volume of the EQ. This can really come in handy for just minor gain staging tweaks of the mix. Another really cool tip, you can right-click on the plugin and select Oversampling, which will oversample the sample rate when the sample goes inside the EQ, resulting in higher resolution processing and downsampling when outputting. Number 3 is Reverb. Reverb is an extremely useful tool. It allows us to place a sound in a specific environment, which in most cases is entirely inaccessible to the home musician or producer, or even in a studio setting, to be honest. Far left, we have the dry-wet knob. This determines how much of the wet reverberated signal is present in the output mix of the sound, which we can move fully between dry, which is no reverb, and wet, which is full reverb. Reflect and diffuse, this is the relationship you create in your mix between early and late reflections in your reverb. In case you didn't know, all reverbs are divided into two: early reflections and late reflections. Early reflections are the initial hit that reflects off the surface, and late reflections are the diffusion network, which is actually the tail of the reverb. Let's keep going. Input processing is what we're actually sending into the reverb. Low and high cut filters edit the sound, or if we turn them off, it sends the whole raw signal into the reverb. So what pre-delay is it basically delays the reverb sound from the actual source signal, so we can delay the actual reverb effect from 0 to 250 milliseconds, basically detaching the effect from the original sound. For more natural reverbs, you should keep it between 1 and 25 milliseconds, depending on the size of the room that you're going for. If you want to retain more clarity in the ambiance, it's recommended that you use a pre-delay in your reverb. Okay, so here we are in early reflections. Shape will decide how the early reflection is blending with the late reflection. We'll get to late reflection next. It'll make more sense in a second. A smaller shape will decay more gradually, and in a larger shape, the reflections will decay more rapidly. If you look at the modulation spectrum of the early reflections, you can see that up and down is the amount of reflection, and left and right is the speed of the actual modulation. Global quality, this is the output quality of your effect. We can choose between eco, mid, and high, which is the most CPU heavy, but is also the most condensed, high quality echo in the room. Size, this decides the actual size of the reverb. It's gauged in percentage, which 100% is natural form of the effect. Far left, we hear more shifting diffused delay in the reverb, and far left, we hear more shallow, colorful, metallic type of sound. Stereo, this can go all the way down to collapse fully into a mono signal, or all the way up to 120% to somewhat mimic what our ears are actually hearing. Decay time is essentially the length of the reverb tail. And if we go up to the diffusion network, this is the main control to shape how the reverb is behaving, basically. When you take down a frequency, say frequency 1, the decay behaves much faster than the raised high frequency with, say, frequency 2. If you cut out the low end here and bring up the wet signal to 100%, you can actually hear the high end wash of the reverb tail and vice versa. Freeze is pretty cool. We can actually freeze the reverb tail for as long as we want. And if we enable cut, we can see that no feedback loop is going to generate behind the signal, which would typically boost the gain over time as the tail develops. Flat actually bypasses the frequencies in the diffusion network and ignore the changes that we make to either frequency 1 or 2. Density further controls how dense the diffusion network is. To the left, we hear thinner echoes, and to the right, we hear much denser echoes. Scale changes the darkness or brightness of the reverb, and chorus actually adds a really cool modulation to the diffusion network itself. So to make it easier to understand, reverb is essentially a collection of echoes that emulates as if a sound is being recorded in a specific place. If you actually break down what it is you're doing to a sound, this reverb is a really overpowered tool to come as a stock plug. At number 2, we have the saturator. Saturator is basically very light distortion, Also a harmonic exciter, which changes the harmonic content of the sound entirely. It can also double as a complete sound design or distortion of your choice. So here's what the saturator is doing. Essentially, drive will add harmonic content to your sound. It basically just determines how much we're driving the actual saturator. In the middle, the XY axis will display the curve that we're using, and we can actually choose between different types of saturation. We have analog clip, which is obviously the direct source signal. Soft sine, which is a hard curve. Various levels of harmonic content start to develop, and we can easily pick through which sound works best in the moment. Next, we have the sinusoid fold. This folds the sound completely into itself, and it's better for a lot of like sound design purposes. Digital clip, which gives a lot of its own harmonic content. And lastly, wave shaper. And within the wave shaper, we have 6 controls to shape the waves in all sorts of ways. We have drive, which is how much the signal is being influenced by the wave shaper. Lean, which works with the curve and depth knob together and is going to alter the linear portion of the shape in the curve. Curve, which adds third order harmonics. Damp, which flattens the sound near the grid's origin and kind of acts like a noise gate. Depth, which controls the amplitude but also is a built-in sine wave that is superimposed on the actual distortion. And period determines the density of repeats in the superimposed sine wave. DC is a direct current filter and removes any sounds that may have a direct current in them, usually for more modular and analog gear. Next, we have color. Bass is how much saturation will go into the low frequencies. To the left, we have more low frequencies, and to the right, higher. Frequency controls more of the higher frequencies in the saturation. Width is the width of the filter, and depth is how much of the saturation is actually in the final mix. And finally, output is how loud your sound is after everything is said and done with the saturation. A cool thing about this saturator is if you right-click, you can select high quality for more larger sessions where small edits and higher quality sound design is needed. This will use more CPU, but it's extremely useful in more professional type settings. Now for our number 1 stock Ableton plugin. But first, my YouTube analytics show that 80% of you guys watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel. It really means a lot when you guys show your support and really does a lot for the growth of the channel. So please, if you're enjoying this content, hit that sub button, like this video, and let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Let's get back to it. Number 1, the glue compressor. Glue compressor was designed in pair with Cytomic, who makes really good algorithms for circuits, and we're even involved in designing the EQ8. Modeled after the SSL bus console compressor, this stock plugin has a really natural glue effect and is really good on basically anything, not to mention the user interface is really friendly. Basically, it's all kind of right here in front of you. Here we have the threshold, which is basically the main knob of the compressor. Everything that exceeds the threshold is going to be compressed. You'll start to see the meter move accordingly to show how much gain reduction we're getting here. The more we turn it counterclockwise, essentially the more compression. Makeup compensates the volume we lost through the compression from the threshold knob. Here we start to really hear the transients and the textures start to come alive and fit together in the audio source. Attack is essentially how fast the compressor is going to reach max compression after the signal passes through the threshold. It's counted in milliseconds, so if we set it slow at 30, you can still hear the transients really well and the signal is still very dynamic. And if we set it at fast, you can really start to hear the compression start to take over in the audio. Release is basically how long the compression completely stops compressing after the threshold drops beneath the threshold. 1.2 is slow and 0.1 reacts to more sudden changes in your compression. Ratio is how much compression we're actually getting. So soft is really cool. Basically, it's a built-in limiter. When it's activated, no matter how much you boost the signal, it'll never clip. This handles the loudness of your track, covering everything in your effects chain up to and including the compressor, not after it. Range is one of the parts that was specifically modeled after the SSL. It's essentially the range of compression that bypasses the threshold meter. If we set this to 5 dB, no matter what we do in the threshold knob, the compression will never drop below 5 dB. Dry, wet is the mix between the dry signal and full wet compression. Also a quick tip, if you set it around 50%, that's a good place to start for parallel compression. This plugin is really versatile and it's good for all around group and individual track compression, but it's also really good for sidechain compression too. Just drag the glue compressor into your sample or melody track, click the drop-down menu, enable sidechain, activate your kick track, and you get a really clean sidechain compression on your kick. Glue compressor is really underrated, and in my opinion, it's the most versatile, useful plugin that you could ever ask for in a stock package. What's up, everybody? Post-production Wayne here. Just wanted to stop by and let you know if you learned anything today, or if you guys liked the video, please don't forget to like the video, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to know when I post more videos in the future. Have a good one, and like always, good luck with your music.